Da 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 da
Albert Malcolm stood over the waste repository in a dark alley that could have been cut from the very fabric of reality. It was thin, and he couldn't imagine any man larger than himself being able to move within its walls. An odd place to put a dumpster, but a perfect place to hide a body. He felt sort of a cartoon headache. Stars were in his eyes. He could swear he heard the sound of chirping birds, accompanied by the heavy rainfall that had caused him to tumble into this place after his own messy brown hair had blinded him. He knew this sensation was rapture. Albert had spent his entire adult life chasing this feeling, having been denied any knowledge of maternal love after the untimely death of his father, who was stern and showed affection by placing a roof over their heads. His first date had vomited on him when he tried to kiss her from consuming too much wine, likely to prepare what she thought would be an evening of boredom and despair. He'd grown to live without physical touch. It didn't move him, whether it was a handshake or a bump from passing strangers. His body felt stone upon impact. His pulse slowed to a dull ache, and his breath left him like a soul left the body upon death. In this way, he felt very much like a corpse himself. Malcolm barely heard the rain anymore. He didn't feel the cold snap against his body as the tiny torrents berated him like gunfire. He just stood there enamored, waiting to enact on dark impulse. Albert likened himself to dead flesh and felt in many ways he belonged amongst it. No forced empathy or morality. A corpse would provide the most tender of kisses. No agenda behind the eyes, thrown open like windows in the summer. No old familiar feelings arching a lover's back that he could be confused by or mull over. It would be something that would be his and only his. A gift he wouldn't have to share. It didn't matter to him that the body was of a man. What mattered to him was the cold, lifeless, leathery-looking flesh upon the body. Albert was close enough to inhale the putrid scents escaping from the plastic when he heard the noise. A light tapping that was barely distinguishable from the hail of bullets that descended from the heavens. He turned to see an incredibly thin woman with stringy black hair that looked as if she'd been dragged through a sewer. Her eyes were masked, and her large overcoat seemed to be more of an obstruction to her mobility than protection from the elements. He instantly recognized her as Diane, a colleague and maybe the only woman that Albert had borne any real attraction to in some years. She always wore a look of discomfort when they were in groups that he is sure very much matched his own. He overheard once that her parents died in some mysterious accident when she was a teenager, which left her with a nice inheritance and an estate she barely left. People speculated about her here and there, but much like Albert, she often went unnoticed. What was she doing here? He couldn't help but wonder. Before Albert could get an answer, she was on him, her arms around him tight. The touch of her felt undeniable and exquisitely barren. He should have taken note of this. Her words were fast. She told him that he left something behind, and she tried to rush after him, but the rain was so heavy. Albert didn't care. Her touch was a welcome distraction. It nearly made him forget about the corpse. My God, the body, he thought. Oh, no sooner did this thought breach his consciousness had Albert felt a sharp pain at his side. He looked down to see the twisted, toothy smile of Diane's, the likes of which he had never seen before. Her arm held his neck in place, carefully and firmly, like a mother would hold a newborn child, and the knife was kissing his side in the same respect. The sensation he felt in that moment could only be described as orgasmic, and as a slowly rising flood started about their ankles, suddenly he knew everything. The look he'd seen on Diane's face in the office was the same discontent and misanthropy that he himself had felt. He knew in that moment that they were the same creature, only she acted out on her impulses, whereas he did not. Inside, they were both dead, both of them monsters. And as they looked at each other then, he could tell that she knew this too. Diane turned her head to the trash can. She had been careless and quick in disposing of the body, but the look in Albert's eyes made what could have been her biggest mistake her greatest blessing. She leaned into him, close to his neck, and whispered daringly low, just barely above the sound of the rain. "Do you want to touch it?" It was at that moment that Diane and Albert had their very first kiss. I'd like to thank you for tuning in to another episode of D.O. Holmes Presents. Corpses is from the very first volume of the Seemingly Strange and Unusual Tales series, co-written by Tiffany Pennywell and myself. You can find all 3 volumes available on Amazon.com. Again, thank you for tuning in to another episode. Remember to like and subscribe, and there's a list of ways you can support the channel below. Till next weekend.